Good evening and welcome to I-24's special coverage of the Israeli elections 2020. I'm Michelle McCory in New York. And it's now 4 hours since polls closed in Israel's third national election in a year. Israelis got another opportunity to try and end the political stalemate. Now, voter turnout indicates that Israelis do want political resolution. The highest number of voters coming to the polls since 1999, a 71% turnout. Not even coronavirus keeping away the voters. Now, the exit polls indicate that this has all been in Prime Minister Netanyahu's favor. All three exit polls showing a gain for his Likud party. Channel 11 has Likud with 36 seats and Benny Gantz's Blue and White party with 33 seats. Channel 12 has Likud with 37 and Blue and White with 32. Channel 13 also has Likud with 37 and Blue and White with 34. Now, we do want to stress that these are not the official results. These are the exit polls from Israel's leading television channels. They do have a history of not always being so precise. But the polls do show that Netanyahu's right-wing bloc is ahead with either 59 or 60 seats. Remember, 61 seats is the number needed to get a majority in the Knesset to form a ruling coalition. All right, let's bring in Mike Wagenheim. Mike, we just heard from Benny Gantz. He didn't quite give a concession speech, but he made it clear that the road ahead is long, saying that Blue and White has just begun. They will continue to serve the state of Israel, but indicated that they will be serving perhaps more in the capacity of a strong opposition. From what we know now, from what these exit polls indicate, break it down for us and the chances of Blue and White having the chance to form the coalition.
Small, still very small. Blue and White had a lot of momentum heading into this election until the last week to week and a half, where the polls indicate that there was a late Likud surge. Certainly not the results that Blue and White wanted. And keep in mind, Blue and White is this kind of hodgepodge of different-minded parties, some rightist, some center. They have some leftist elements in them. And the question has always been, how long can they hang on for? How long can they hang in the opposition? Probably not at all. There's too many divergent opinions in there. They've really run on an anybody but Netanyahu platform. Their policy positions are not very different than Benjamin Netanyahu's when you look at the party as a whole. So it was really surrounding the corruption problems that Netanyahu is suffering from, and that's why Blue and White was formed. So if they're in the opposition, they really cease to have a reason to go on. Here's the Channel 11. This is one of the three major networks that put out an exit poll. These are not official numbers, and keep in mind, exit polls in Israel are historically, unbelievably unreliable. But just for fun, we'll give them to you anyway. Likud showing 59 seats. That was revised down from 60. They just came out with a revised poll, which puts them down at 59, which is huge because you need 61 seats to form a majority government. If they have 60, maybe they can grab a defector from the other side. 59, not impossible, makes it tougher. Again, very unofficial numbers. These are only exit polls, not real hard vote-counted numbers. Blue and White at 54 seats, and Yisrael Beitenu, led by Avigdor Lieberman, that supposed kingmaker who has turned into a foe of Benjamin Netanyahu, at 7 seats. So you look at Blue and White, 54, Yisrael Beitenu, 7. Why not 61? Well, it's not that easy because we have different elements within different parties that won't sit in a government with other parties. So it's not as simple as just 54 plus 7 gets you to 61. That was a Channel 11 poll. Let's take a look at what Channel 12 put out here. We don't have it up, but Channel 12, basically same thing, 59 seats for the bloc and 54 for Blue and White, and Channel 13, 59 for Likud's bloc and 55 for Benny Gantz's center-left and Arab bloc. So according to the exit polls, Benjamin Netanyahu and all three exit polls, now that they've been revised, 2 seats short of a majority 61-seat government. 1 seat makes a lot of difference when you're trying to grab people from the other side, Michelle.
It absolutely does. And that 1 seat may be there when the official results come in. Again, we want to stress these are the exit poll results, and they do not even include the voting of the Israeli Defense Forces, which tend to lean to the right. Mike, we'll check in with you later. Let's bring in my guests in studio for some analysis. Thane Rosenbaum, distinguished professor at Torah University, and Eric Mendel, director of the Middle East Political Information Network. Here we are again, Thane. Here we are again.
We knew it. We knew it, Michelle.
All right, but from what we see so far, And again, exit poll results. It does look like there could be a 59 or maybe a 60-seat coalition for Prime Minister Netanyahu. But that would indicate we would still be in a political deadlock unless an extra seat or two come from somewhere.
That's quite right. But again, there are still polls, there's still votes that yet have not been counted, and historically the right wing tends to have the later votes that are cast. I understand that Likud has already identified at least one or two candidates who are on the list for blue and white that they could peel away and bring over. That would take them to 61. I mean, clearly this is a gigantic victory for Netanyahu, and more importantly, I would say, it's an amazing victory for Israeli democracy. Because think about this, Michelle, you turned to me and said, here we are again, right? Because you and I, and we've done this now, this is the third time, many people believed even a week ago that there would be apathy and indifference among Israelis, just sick of this deadlock in their Knesset elections. Instead, they came out, as you said, in almost record turnout with the coronavirus plaguing the country.
We had 14 polling stations that were set up specifically for people that do have the coronavirus infection, and they turned out to vote as well.
That would not happen in the United States, and I'm not even sure what Western democracies would have. Also, the joint list. I'm not sure if Mike mentioned it, but it looks like they may get 14 up to 15 seats.
Yeah.
What a, remember in the first election when we were talking, they weren't even in the money at that point because they hadn't combined their forces. In the second election, they decided to come together as a bloc. In the third election, it appears that they actually pulled seats away from Israeli Jews away from the left wing. It appears that from the exit polls, think about this, that the left-wing Israeli Jews ended up voting for the joint list.
Yeah.
So this is, in some ways of looking at it, a huge victory, and I'd be surprised if Netanyahu doesn't form a mandate, a coalition, and receive the mandate.
Eric, to Thane's point, this is a great testimony to Israel's democracy because they really want to make sure that the will of the people is truly represented. And as we said, the people came out, 71% voter turnout. Who do you think that stands to favor in the final results, that increased voter turnout?
Well, I think what happened was that Benny Gantz was something in the beginning that was considered, people could paint on him whatever they wanted, and he was a war hero. He brought two other generals, Bogi Ya'alon, Gabi Ashkenazi, and Bibi was not popular at that point of time. But what has happened since then, especially for this election, is Bibi's been forced to go out, re-energize his base, and to be out there, that he wasn't just somebody on Facebook, he wasn't just somebody there on television, and that changed everything. But I wanted to just get to Thane's point about Israel's democracy. So Israel's democracy, I happen to agree that this was really said a lot about Israel's democracy is what the people wanted. But what's going to happen next, this is nothing in comparison to the constitutional crisis that's about to happen. Thane, as a constitutional scholar, could really address this. But from a political point of view, you're going to have a judiciary of unelected people may take away Bibi's right to form a government.
And of course, he's referring to the corruption and bribery trial that awaits Prime Minister Netanyahu starting March 17th. He may be in a position that he's putting together a governing coalition, perhaps even governing whilst being on trial, Thane.
And it's legally not sure, because it's so unprecedented, whether President Rivlin can even give him the mandate.
Right.
We've never been in this position before. There might have to be an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court. I assumed in the various times that you and I spoke since the last election that the Israeli Supreme Court was praying to Adonai that Netanyahu would lose so that they wouldn't be in this position. Nobody wants to be in this position. And as Eric points out, what's really extraordinary about this is unelected Supreme Court justices, do they want to defy the will of the people? Netanyahu picks up 59, 60 seats.
Right.
What's more important, the rule of law or the majoritarian preferences in a democratic system?
All right. Well, we will continue to have this discussion, Thane and Eric, and we'll be back after this break covering Israel's national elections for 2020. Keep it right here.
Holy Land. It has awed and inspired and consoled the faithful for centuries. Holiness is here, in the land, in the light, in the ruins and houses of worship. Let us take you there each week as we uncover the rich and fascinating history of man's search for spirituality in this ancient land. Join me each week for the Holy Land Uncovered.
Welcome back to I-24's special coverage of the Israeli elections. I'm Michelle McCory, and Israelis have voted in an unprecedented third election in the space of a year. Exit polls are showing Netanyahu's Likud party having the majority of the seats, but still not quite enough for his right-wing coalition to have the 61 seats needed. Let's check in now with Eli Hochenberg, who is standing by at the Likud headquarters. Eli, last elections, a very different mood at Likud headquarters round about this time. Somewhat a mood of despair or disappointment in September, but that's not the sense that we're getting is the mood there now, is it?
Right, Michelle, you and I spoke exactly several months ago in the September elections, and the atmosphere here was the exact opposite of the Likud party DNA, which is usually vivid and lively. Back then, it was a very, very dark, upsetting atmosphere. Tonight started in a striking opposition, celebratory mood throughout the evening, but in the past hour or so, ever since the updated exit polls came out, this celebratory mood was somewhat replaced by cautious optimism. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu left Jerusalem with his convoy about 30 minutes ago. He's on his way here to the Likud party headquarters in Tel Aviv, and despite the shift in the pending results, he is intending, from what I understand, to carry out a victorious speech that was also a strategy, or a tactic rather, at the final stretch of the election campaign to try and mobilize and motivate right-wingers, Likud party voters in particular, to convince them that the victory is in reach, and by that to encourage them to actually head out and vote. But when the name of the game is reaching this golden number of 61 seats, there is a very distinct difference between 60 seats for the right-wing bloc or 59. So again, a very good mood was somewhat replaced by cautious optimism as we are awaiting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to take the podium in the coming minutes, Michelle.
All right, cautious optimism, as you say, Eli, and again, these are the results of the exit polls, but they still have him ahead of Blue and White Party, whether it's by 3 seats or 4 seats. He still does seem to be in a better position than he was last time around. So what happened? What are people attributing this to?
Absolutely, and it is important to note, Michelle, that in all those updated exit polls, the Likud party still maintains 37 seats, which is, again, a remarkable achievement, as you've mentioned. In the aftermath of the September elections, the bottom line of the post-mortem sessions Netanyahu had with his team was that there were too many right-wing voters who simply did not vote. Hence, the main goal this time around was to increase voter turnout. And this is why we've seen Netanyahu launching this nationwide tour, really going from north to south. We're talking about 3, 4, 5, even 6 supporters rallies per day, talking to the people, trying to convince them to head out and vote, to make sure that not even one right-wing voters will stay at home, especially not Likud party voters. So there was a lot of groundwork on behalf of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and also perhaps a different strategy than what we've seen in the past. There was this trend here in Israel that was dubbed as inner bloc cannibalism. That is where that in the final stretch of election campaigns, the bigger parties of each respective blocs are trying to take a chunk of the smaller parties on their side. This time around, we haven't seen Netanyahu launching an aggressive campaign, rather, vis-a-vis the hawkish Yamina list, but trying to keep things positive, if you will, concentrating on mobilizing and motivating voters, and this is what we're seeing tonight. This is the result of his efforts on the ground, Michelle.
All right, and it sounds like the celebratory mood is picking up. There are a lot of excitement. Ellie, we will check in with you later in the night, especially as Prime Minister Netanyahu looks set to take the stage there at Likud headquarters in about 25 minutes or so, as you said. Ellie, thanks so much. Let's now go to Owen Altman, who's standing by at the Blue and White headquarters. Owen, we just heard from Blue and White leader Benny Gantz, not quite a consolation speech, but not quite a victory speech either. What was your read on what we heard from Benny Gantz?
Michelle, pretty much exactly that. You know, after Gantz spoke, as often happens at these events, everyone went home, and now this is being packed up. But certainly it was a roller coaster evening here. You know, for the first few hours after polls closed, Michelle, there was nobody here. There were no activists. There were very few members of parliament. It felt dead. It felt, as one other person on Twitter put it, like a graveyard. But then the activists came to hear Benny Gantz, and again, at that point in time, the exit polls had been now famously revised down to 59 for the right-wing bloc. That seemed to put some wind in the blue and white sails, and understandably, Benny Gantz called on everyone to wait until the votes are counted because, of course, as you correctly keep on saying, we don't really know what the results are. This election continues to hang on a knife's edge, and we'll have to wait throughout the morning and even thereafter for the votes from the soldiers, the coronavirus quarantined, and the rest. But, you know, I will say this, Michelle, reading between the lines of Benny Gantz's speech, I felt that this really was the speech of a leader who feels that he will one way or another be in the opposition. And it was very, very important for him to emphasize, along the lines of what Mike Wagenheim was talking about a few moments ago, that even though blue and white is a disparate coalition of these different political factions, that this is a movement with staying power, that it's held together by common values, and it's going to be fighting day in and day out in the Israeli parliament no matter what happens. But Michelle, when a leader says that, he usually means he's headed to the opposition, although, of course, Benny Gantz can't be sure because we don't know what the results are. And whether it's 59 seats, 60 or 61 matters so very much.
And I also want to remind our viewers that in the April election, the first go-round when we checked in with you at Blue and White headquarters, they were in fact celebrating because the exit polls indicated that they had quite a significant lead. As we know, the final results didn't quite match up with that. You speak about the future for the Blue and White party, and Benny Gantz stressing that he is going to be, at the very least, a tough opposition. Is there a sense that if this does somehow go to a fourth election, and this is Israeli politics, so anything is possible at this point, that Benny Gantz's position as the leader of the Blue and White Party could be in jeopardy?
Great question, Michelle, and I think there are a lot of us asking that tonight. You know, I will say this. I asked 2 members of parliament from Blue and White tonight during our broadcast, okay, so Benny Gantz has failed 3 times. Should he still be the leader? They both said yes. Now, of course, they would say that. They're part of Benny Gantz's faction from within the Blue and White Party. They depend on Benny Gantz for their position on the Blue and White Party's list. But obviously, there are going to be many, many people asking whether this is the person to be the standard bearer for the movement against Prime Minister Netanyahu and against elements on the Israeli right. But the question is, what is the alternative? You know, it's been a very, very long time that the center left here in Israel has been searching for a real standard bearer. And Benny Gantz, over the course of the past year, for all of the ups, for all of the downs, has seemed to be the person who is most up to the job among all the other candidates, imperfect as he is, often criticized for his campaign.
All right. Well, it seems as though we've lost Owen Alterman, who was reporting from the Blue and White headquarters. Let's bring back our panel. Thane Rosenbaum, Distinguished Professor at Touro University. Eric Mendel, Director at the Middle East Political Information Network. And joining us now, Matt Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. And Matt, let's start with you, because the exit polls do seem to indicate a win for Netanyahu. It does seem as though he is in a better position to form a ruling government here. What do you anticipate?
Well, I mean, I think we can certainly say that it's not going to be possible for Blue and White to win. I mean, the fact is, if they have to include the Joint Arab List in the coalition, that's not going to work for a lot of Israelis. Benny Gantz has not had the personality of a politician. He's not performed as well as he has in the past, in the previous few elections. And I think it's going to be hard to hold on to a position where he is claiming on one hand to want to compromise, but on the other hand saying what I need is Netanyahu to step down. And that's the only way it goes forward. The country in Israel, in its democracy, has yet again had a plurality vote for Netanyahu, with all Israelis knowing what the indictments are against him and what the charges are. So at this point, right, Netanyahu is still within, a few inches of trying to get people. This is going to probably make some people fray from the Blue and White coalition who might see a better, brighter political future in Likud.
Yeah, and that could be the Likud strategy, to pick off some members of Knesset from Blue and White. Thane, very quickly, do you think that Blue and White lost because their message consistently was not Bibi?
Yes, and I also want to get back to something Eric said, which was that, Netanyahu took to the road. And in the first two elections, he really relied on his global statesmanship and his booming economy and security, but he decided not to, take to the road. And this really very much exposed Gantz as a deficient candidate. And Netanyahu is a very effective politician, and I think it made a big difference this time.
All right, we'll continue our analysis. Thank you so much, Thane Rosenbaum and Eric Mendel. Meanwhile, the U.S. is scrambling to try and slow the spread of coronavirus as numbers of infected cases are soaring outside of China. We want to get you updated on that, as well as some of the other news stories we're following. Let's check in with Derek Dennis, who is in our newsroom tonight. Derek, what's the latest?
Good evening, Michelle. There are growing concerns over the deadly coronavirus as it continues to spread in the United States and around the world. The World Health Organization says containment is key as infections outside of China balloon. Globally, there are more than 88,000 confirmed cases and more than 3,000 deaths. In the U.S., there are 4 more deaths, bringing the total to 6 in Washington state. And across the country, 100 confirmed cases of the virus, including the first case in New York, a 39-year-old woman who recently returned from Iran and tested positive. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says the woman's condition is mild, but he expects the number of cases in New York to rise.
This is New York. We're a gateway to the world. You see all these cases around the world, around the country. Of course, we're going to have it here. And that's why the whole challenge is about containment.
Meanwhile, Italy now has the most coronavirus cases outside of Asia. Things not slowing down there as the number of confirmed cases jumps to more than 2,000, with 52 deaths so far. And on Wall Street, stocks snapping back today after a wave of selling that led to one of the worst weeks for global markets in more than a decade. Investors looking for the world's governments and central banks to help the global economy hit by the coronavirus. Taking a look at the numbers now, the Dow rebounding with gains of more than 1,200 points, or 5.09%. It's the biggest point gain ever. The Nasdaq jumping to nearly 4.5%, and the S&P 500 up by 4.6%. In the race for 2020, the Democratic field is consolidating, with 2 candidates dropping out and ready to throw their support behind Joe Biden. Amy Klobuchar is expected to join Vice President Joe Biden at a rally in Dallas tonight, along with Pete Buttigieg, who ended his run for the White House yesterday. yesterday. Both Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar will reportedly endorse Biden at that rally, putting up a united front of moderates in the campaign. The two had success early on, but struggled to gain momentum in recent weeks. Texas is one of the 14 states where voters are headed to the polls tomorrow on Super Tuesday and has the second largest number of delegates at stake behind California. And there's some sad news. A well-known name in the U.S. has passed away. Former General Electric CEO and Chairman Jack Welch has died at the age of 84, well known for having a laser focus while leading General Electric for 20 years. Those are the headlines from I-24 News. Our coverage of the Israeli election continues next.
On Stateside, it's not just about delivering the news. It's about giving meaning to the news and doing so with clarity.
These families waiting to get into the country, how long will they be in detention?
Fact-based journalism, live breaking news, and stories right from where they happen.
This is Zimbabwe's Berlin Wall moment.
Because what happens around the rest of the world can have a huge impact on the United States, and what happens in the United States can have a huge impact on the rest of the world. That's Stateside.
Brace yourself for your daily dose of news. I'm Jeff Smith. Join me every day for a fast-paced breakdown of major international stories with an emphasis on live reporting, an analysis of news you need to know. We'll track the headlines quickly, expertly, in a dose you can handle.
From Hollywood to the Holy Land, we bring you all that's trending in lifestyle, arts, entertainment, and technology. Speaking to the culture catalysts which create, innovate, and inspire. Plus, what's turning heads in the social sphere. If it's creating a buzz, we've got it covered. Tune into Trending, only on I-24 News.
Whether you're just getting out of bed or starting your day, or you're already hard at work, we cut through the clutter to give you the right dose. Breaking news and top headlines from Israel, the Middle East, and around the world. Politics, pop culture, sports, and music. We track the big stories from the heart of the Middle East. Brace yourself for your daily dose of news.
In the heat of the Israeli election campaign, discover I-24 News Radio. Now you can listen to I-24 News anywhere, anytime, for free. I-24 News Radio is the audio live stream of the television network with world headlines every 30 minutes starting from 7 a.m. Tune in for top news, magazines editions while in the car, in your office. Join us from your smartphone, tablet, or desktop to stay connected in the Middle East and around the world. Don't wait any longer. Head to our website or mobile application and click on I-24 News Radio to subscribe.
אני זוכר את הניצחון הראשון שלנו ב-1996. זה היה ניצחון היסטורי, אבל הניצחון הזה, הפעם, הוא אפילו מתוק, לא פחות אם לא יותר. ניצחון גדול.
All right, you're watching special coverage of Israel's national elections for the 23rd Knesset. The exit polls do seem to indicate that Netanyahu's Likud party is taking a lead over blue and white. And that's Prime Minister Netanyahu now addressing the crowd at the Likud headquarters with his wife Sarah standing by his side. There's obviously some cautious optimism. These are the exit poll results, but they do seem to point that the Likud party does have more seats than Benny Gantz's blue and white party. And there are indications that Prime Minister Netanyahu may at least have a 59 to 60 Knesset member bloc, again, short of the 61 votes that's needed. As you can see, throngs of Likud supporters, tremendous energy, a lot of smiles and applause. Let's listen in for a little bit. Although he's speaking in Hebrew, we'll translate. All right, Netanyahu thanking his supporters, saying that their devotion and their support, there is nothing to compare that to. Prime Minister Netanyahu also stressing the need to continue to push forward with the security issues of the country. All right, let's bring in Mike Wagenheim. Mike, the big question here, as we said, the exit polls do seem to show that the Likud party does have a couple of seats over blue and white. But the big question has always been putting together that coalition government. From what we know, is that possible?
Yeah, it's nice to have bragging rights. It's certainly good to have increased power, generally speaking, within the government by having more seats. But yes, in Israeli elections, it's all about getting to that magic 61 number as a bloc, as a coalition. So let's take a look at what the exit polls, again, these are unofficial numbers. They're just sample surveys taken by voters coming out of the polls. The three main channels, Channel 11, 12, and 13. Here's Channel 11's exit poll showing Likud over top of blue and white by 3 seats. You have the Joint Arab List at 15, which would be the most they've ever had. The Shas Party, one of the ultra-Orthodox religious parties, with 9. The other ultra-Orthodox party, United Torah Judaism, with 8. Yamina, the religious nationalist party, with 7. These are the Channel 12 numbers here. Likud with a 5-seat advantage on blue and white. Again, those other numbers, generally speaking, holding steady there down the line. And the Channel 13 polls, let's take a look at those. A little bit of a tightening in the Channel 13 poll, 37 to 34 in favor of Likud. Again, those other numbers going down the line, give or take a seat here or there, pretty much the same. But give or take a seat here or there, that's everything when you're talking about 59 seats or 60 seats or getting to that magical 61. So that's the big difference right now. That's what Netanyahu needs to get to, is 61. These exit polls show that he's not there yet. The way to get there would be to pick off a couple of willing members of Knesset, like-minded, willing members of Knesset from the opposition, likely the blue and white party, to come on over to the dark side, whatever you want to call it, to the Likud, to that coalition, and get to that magic 61. It is very difficult because Benjamin Netanyahu will have to offer the world to get this 61, not just to the defectors, but to his traditional coalition partners. You got to know that Netanyahu's in a bind right now. He's facing trial coming up on March 17th. He knows he has to stay in power as a bargaining chip. It's all he has right now is the power of the prime minister's office. They're going to pick his bones clean in trying to get everything they can, ministerial portfolios, budgets, committee chairmanships. There's only enough to go. There's only so much to go around. So Netanyahu, to get to that 61, is going to have to give away everything, and maybe the shirt right off his back.
Yeah, as you say, Mike, he's not really negotiating from a position of strength. I do want to just update our viewers on the official results. We are starting to get those coming in. We've only got about 4.9% of the official vote counted, but it does indicate that Likud is ahead with 32% of the vote that has been counted. Blue and White Party, 24.2% of that, about 5% of the vote that has been counted. We'll continue to update that. But the thing is that it does seem to show the same trend that we're seeing in the exit polls. All right, let's bring in our fresh panel. We have got Jonathan Tobin, editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Service, and contributing writer to the National Review magazine, and Middle East analyst Mika Halpern. And back with us is Matt Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. All right, Jonathan, we heard Mike Wagenheim stress the point that if a coalition is to come, it'll probably mean that some blue and white party members will have to defect. So have we essentially completely written off Lieberman and his role in all of this?
To a certain extent, I think that's true. Because let's go to the worst case scenario right now, because a lot of our speculation, because Netanyahu seemed to be close to a coalition, we're all assuming no fourth election, he's going to one way or another create a coalition. But let's say the parties are as immutable and unmovable as they have been for the last year. Tactically, that's not terrible for Netanyahu, because his goal is to remain in office. And as much as he has failed to form a coalition over the last year, he has also remained in office. He has become the permanent, impermanent Prime Minister of Israel. And it's, allowing him to do this, the fact that he finished first, a lot of politics is illusion. It's as Herzl said in his diaries, the illusion of momentum. That's what Netanyahu has right now. That will, at the very least, enable him to stay as prime minister, be the one forming the coalition, and who knows what will happen. We don't know how long that trial will last. We don't know the outcome of that trial. Neither does Netanyahu. All he knows is he's going to stay in office as long as possible, and this result, which was as much a referendum on Benny Gantz as it was on Netanyahu, and a negative referendum on Benny Gantz, who's no longer the bright young thing. He's now 3 elections in and 3 failures. Netanyahu can't count this as a loss, no matter how you look at it.
All right, Matt, one of Netanyahu's big selling points has always been that he is the person to represent Israel on the global stage, that he can hold court with world leaders like President Trump, like President Putin. What role do you think the Trump Middle East peace plan, the Israeli-Palestinian peace plan, played in these elections?
I think it played a part, but the part wasn't huge. The fact is, it was another rabbit that the American president was able to pull out of his hat in order to help Netanyahu. But the fact is, Netanyahu is just better at campaigning. We found that out again, of course, as he really hit the ground for Likud primaries. But he simply has been able to navigate very difficult waters for about 10 years straight, including issues with Putin in Russia, with Syria, with Iran. These are all very serious issues. And if you recall, a week or so ago, there was a rally that Netanyahu held, and Mike Huckabee was there, and he was saying, again, from an American Christian perspective, that it's important that we have someone who's like a Winston Churchill, who is Netanyahu. Netanyahu is seen around the world as a world leader, and that's very important. It's harder positions to stay if you're Gantz and you're simply saying Netanyahu won't do, and to offer up no other type of platform that works, or for Lieberman to have an unreasonable position where he's unwilling to compromise and is in fact causing this. The bell curve of Lieberman's influence might seem to be waning at this point.
All right, Matt, thank you so much, Matt Brodsky. Mika, we do want to get your thoughts, but we'll have to wait for those till after the break. Jonathan as well. I do want to just keep our viewers updated. According to the exit polls, Likud is ahead with about 36 to 37 seats to Blue and White's 34 seats. The Channel 12 result has Likud with 37, Blue and White with 32 seats. We will continue to monitor these exit polls as well, of course, as the actual results as they come in throughout the night. Let's now take another look at Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is now addressing the crowds at the Likud headquarters with what is turning out to be potentially a pretty good night for him.
the Middle East. I-24 News is a witness. Our journalists live and breathe there every day. Get all the latest global news from our studios in Tel Aviv, New York, Washington, and Paris. Anytime, anywhere. Download the I-24 News app, available on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple, and Google stores. I-24 News, see beyond.
From Hollywood to the Holy Land. We bring you all that's trending in lifestyle, arts, entertainment, and technology. Speaking to the culture catalysts which create, innovate, and inspire. Plus, what's turning heads in the social sphere. If it's creating a buzz, we've got it covered. Tune into Trending, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to I-24's special coverage of the Israeli elections 2020. I'm Michelle McCory in New York. And Israelis have voted in an unprecedented third election in a year. The exit polls are all showing that Netanyahu's Likud party does have the majority of the seats, but still not quite enough for his right wing to have the 61 seats needed. All right, let's check in with Shayna Estulan to see what the view from Washington is. Shayna, Netanyahu takes a lot of pride in a strong relationship with President Trump. He does position himself as the leader best positioned to represent Israel on the global stage. Have we heard anything from the White House as these results start to come in?
That is a very good question. I just checked Twitter right before we went on air. The president has not tweeted anything, but really, you have seen the president distance himself from Netanyahu as you've had these elections happening in Israel without a clear victory. The first time there was an election, President Trump came out and supported Netanyahu. The second time he was asked, and President Trump said, our relationship is with the United States and not with Netanyahu. And when the president rolled out the peace plan not too long ago, he very deliberately invited both Netanyahu and Benny Gantz because the White House really wanted to hedge their bet. So we may not hear from the president until everything is sorted out in Israel and we have a clear idea if Netanyahu can in fact put together a government. The White House may have felt burnt already twice from these elections, and so they may be waiting to see what actually happens here.
Shayna Estulan live for us in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu continues to address his fans at the Likud headquarters, his base of supporters. Let's listen in.
משפחתי היקרה, אתם המשענת האיתנה שלי. אני יודע איזה מחירים אתם משלמים יום-יום. אני יודע את ההקרבה העצומה שלכם, רק כדי שנוכל להמשיך להוביל ולהעניק את המדינה שלנו. ואני רוצה להודות לכם, אני אוהב אתכם מאוד מאוד.
Netanyahu continues to really show his appreciation and gratitude to his base.
הלב והנשמה שלכם גברו על כל קושי וכל אתגר, אין כמוכם. ויחד נמשיך להצעיד את מדינת ישראל לפסגות ההצלחה, ובעזרת השם נבטיח את עתיד ישראל לדורות. תודה רבה לכם. תודה.
Thank you. That is what Prime Minister Netanyahu has to say to his base. Confetti falling down, clearly a sense of victory over at the Likud headquarters, saying that together they can continue to work towards the strength, security and prosperity of the state of Israel. clearly a big celebratory, jubilant mood at the Likud headquarters there, with the flags of Israel waving, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Sarah Netanyahu on the stage. And by the way, here's a fun fact for you. The couple will be celebrating their 29th wedding anniversary tomorrow night. So perhaps double cause for celebration for Prime Minister Netanyahu. But again, these are the exit polls. We do want to stress that the results that we're giving you are not the official results. They are just the exit polls. Let's bring in Mike Wagenheim to see where we stand with those official results. When can we expect to get them?
Well, they've already started the counting. It's going to be quite some time before they post the official final results. That can actually drag on for a couple of days. There may be some legal challenges, things of that nature, but we'll at least have results rolling in. About 5% have been counted so far. Let's put it up on the screen and see exactly where we're at this moment in time. These are the official numbers, not exit polls, not surveys, the official hard-counted numbers, with about 5% of the vote counted. If we can put it up on the screen there, the Likud party, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, at a little bit under 32%, with Benny Gantz's blue and white faction at 24%. We look further down the line at those percentages. Keep in mind, these aren't always representative truly of a nationwide count. They count certain areas first. We don't know right now what areas have been counted, whether it's Tel Aviv, which would certainly bolster Benny Gantz's count, maybe Jerusalem, or areas on the periphery, which would boost Likud's count and some of the religious parties' counts. So we don't know. We don't get those numbers. Nobody does until the end, where we see who voted by area. But those are the numbers that the Central Elections Committee have provided to this point. Still a lot of counting to be done, Michelle.
All right, but the math does seem to suggest that either way, Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to be short of that 61-seat majority that he needs in the Knesset. So where is he going to make up the difference from, potentially?
Very few options at this point. In order to get to 61, if you start from 59, which is now the average of the three exit polls, he needs to find two members of Knesset from the opposition. There are a couple quote-unquote contenders out there. Omer Yankelevich, a Haredi woman that resides within Benny Gantz's blue and white faction, and apparently behind the scenes has been accused of bad-mouthing Gantz in private conversations. The Likud party has certainly been looking to pick her off, and she would fit more into the religious nature of that bloc, although none of the religious parties, the ultra-Orthodox parties, have women representatives out of principle. There's also possibly Orly Levy, who has formed a faction with the left-wing Labor Party, but she got her start in the right-wing secular nationalist Yisrael Beitenu party before branching out on her own after being essentially fired by that party. So she's a right-wing-minded, socially-minded member of parliament who may be able to be swayed over with a high-powered portfolio of some kind that would fit into her social background. So those are some of the early contenders, quote-unquote, that I'm sure the Likud party and their coalition partners are looking at right now to try to peel off.
All right, Mike, thank you so much. Mike Wagenheim. Mika, I want to get your thoughts on this. Do you see a conclusive result coming out at the end of all of this? Because essentially, this is what it's all about. Israelis are quite tired of going to the polls, even though they did come out in pretty strong numbers today, 71% voter turnout.
I would say yes, there is a way out. And the first thing is to break the paradigm. Part of the breaking the paradigm, by the way, was to say and suggest that for weeks people are saying there's going to be voter fatigue and voter fatigue and voter fatigue. But people said, no, we're actually going to make a decision. We're going to punish Lieberman, which is where some of those votes to Netanyahu came from. But also there's an important idea that people aren't really focusing on. They're focusing on the number 61. And 61 is a difficult number, by the way. In a ruling coalition of 61, it's very difficult to keep together. Very hard. But it's just as difficult to keep together a minority government, 59. It has happened in Israel. There have been governments that have ruled and governed with 59. They've actually gone as low as 53. So it's important for us to recognize that 61 is the number that everyone's suggesting, because that's majority. But they can still govern with less than 60. It's almost as difficult as governing with 61. When you have 61 people, it means that every single person has to be present for a vote. No one can be sick. No one can go shopping. No one can go to the United States. No one can represent Israel outside of that. They must be there for every single vote. And that's a very difficult thing to do. So 61 is not the big number. Actually, if you want a comfortable ruling coalition, it should be in 64, 65, 66. And so I just want that to be clear. Right. So 61 is a number that we're throwing out because mathematically it makes sense. You should know, by the way, when you do the numbers of the polls, they don't need to equal 120. Two of the polls equal 121 because the numbers just aren't there yet. In addition to that, one has to realize that after the votes, some people don't get enough to get a get into the Knesset. As a result, there are other additional things that creates numbers, representatives. So you can negotiate that back. Let's say someone gets 4 1/3 seats, 5 1/4 seats. Those quarters and thirds can be put together to create, with an agreement, create another seat.
Right, and just to your point, Mika, 61 Knesset seats for the ruling coalition is exactly how we got into these third round of elections.
In the situation in the first place.
With the Lieberman
Exactly.
straying away from that, and that's why we have...
It's an unfair... what happens when you win the election, the party that wins the election is not the strongest party anymore.
All right.
The strongest party is actually the parties are smaller that have to have the leverage to actually create some sort of results.
All right, I want to go check in with Martin Himmel. He's a political security analyst joining us now from Tel Aviv. You're on the ground there, Martin. What is your sense as these results start to take shape?
Well, in some ways, we're still in this deadlock loop. Netanyahu doesn't have the magic number 61, which is still a magic number, and the other side can't generate enough of the blue and white can't generate enough of support to actually take over instead of Netanyahu. The way I see it is Netanyahu will be called to set up a government. He'll try to set up a government, and the way he will try to do it is, first of all, get some defectors. If he can get some defectors out of blue and white, 2, 3, he's in. If he doesn't succeed in getting the defectors, he's going to face a formidable wall. The two wild cards in all this is, will Gantz, even though it's not really accepted in Israeli politics, will he make a deal with the Arab bloc parties, some sort of deal, passive support? If he gets passive support, he might convince Lieberman to go with him, and then he'll have the magic 61. So the clear answer is still far into the future. It will take several weeks, and so we're basically in the same situation we were before the elections and the other elections.
All right. And Martin, as you're speaking there, we are, of course, well, we were showing shots of the Likud headquarters. Bibi Netanyahu's supporters clearly not deterred by the fact that he will be going on trial for bribery and corruption on March 17th. In fact, that may have even rallied them to come out and support him even stronger. Many in Israel that support him believe that that is some kind of conspiracy on the left to try and oust a leader who's been in place for a record amount of time and has arguably done a tremendous amount for the country and certainly for the economy. All right, we'll continue to monitor these results as they come in. Mika Halpern, Martin Himmel, and Jonathan Tobin stick around. A lot more to discuss. We also want to get you updated on other stories that are happening around the world. Of course, the coronavirus outbreak, top of mind, the numbers of infected people soaring outside of China. Let's check back in with Derek Dennis, who's in our newsroom tonight with the latest on that story and the other day's headlines. Derek.
Thank you, Michelle. The deadly coronavirus continues to spread around the world and in the United States, with the U.S. government issuing its strongest travel warning yet, advising Americans not to travel to 2 regions in northern Italy that have been hard hit by the virus. Globally, there are more than 88,000 confirmed cases and more than 3,000 deaths. The World Health Organization says the containment is key as infections outside of China balloon. In the United States, there are 4 more deaths, bringing the total to 6 in Washington State. And across the country, 100 confirmed cases of the virus, including the first case in New York. A 39-year-old woman who recently returned from Iran has tested positive. And in Washington State, health authorities say 6 people have died from coronavirus. Researchers say the virus may have been circulating for weeks undetected. And on Wall Street, stocks rebounded today, regaining some of the ground lost last week in a massive sell-off that gave stocks their worst stretch since the financial crisis of 2008. Investors appeared optimistic that the central banks will take action to shield the global economy from the effects of the coronavirus outbreak. Taking a look at the numbers now, there they are. The Dow rebounded with gains of more than 1,200 points, or 5.09%, its biggest point gain ever. The Nasdaq jumping to nearly 4.5%, and the S&P 500 up 4.6%. In the race for 2020, the Democratic field appears to be consolidating, with 2 candidates dropping out and ready to throw their support behind Joe Biden. Amy Klobuchar is expected to join former Vice President Joe Biden at a rally in Dallas tonight, along with Pete Buttigieg, who ended his run for the White House yesterday. Both Buttigieg and Klobuchar will reportedly endorse Biden at that rally, putting up a united front of moderates in the campaign. The two had success early on, but struggled to gain momentum in the recent weeks. Texas is one of 14 states where voters are heading to the polls tomorrow and on Super Tuesday, and has the second largest number of delegates at stake behind California. Former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg saying he's still in the race. He spoke to Klobuchar and Buttigieg and congratulating them for hard-fought campaigns. Those are the headlines from I-24 News.
We're on the inside of political and religious passions in Jerusalem, breaking down the financial trends shaping the global economy, giving you key context, not just headlines, with the stories from Israel that touch the U.S. and those across the region with impact far beyond its borders. Every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, catch The Rundown, where the Middle East meets the world.
The Middle East. I-24 News is a witness. Our journalists live and breathe there every day. Get all the latest global news from our studios in Tel Aviv, New York, Washington, and Paris. Anytime, anywhere. Download the I-24 News app, available on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple, and Google stores. I-24 News, see beyond.
Let's now check out what is on the cutting edge.
They bring the data, we bring the analytics and the technology.
There are techniques today which can actually take cells and print them to make an organ.
The internet turned the brick and mortar business on top of its head.
Strictly Security, your weekly look into security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. Our team brings the latest on the major international conflicts, analysis of the major security issues right here in the Middle East and around the globe. Join us for a close look at innovative military technology and get up to speed with what's happening in cyberspace. Saturdays, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News, the international channel in the heart of the Middle East, now brings you a new view of this troubled region. From I-24 News' acclaimed Arabic language channel, the stories, the people, the passions of the Middle East that you haven't seen before. A weekly roundup of highlights from I-24 News Arabic. Every Sunday, only on I-24 News.
The Middle East, cradle of civilization, epicenter of the major crisis and conflicts that affect our world today. I-24 News is a witness. Our journalists live and breathe there every day. Get all the latest from our studios in Tel Aviv, New York, Washington, and Paris. As news happens where it happens. I-24 News. See beyond.
I-24's continuing coverage of the Israeli elections 2020. I'm Michelle McCory in New York. Now, polls have been closed for about 5 hours now, and Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party is predicted to gain more seats than Benny Gantz's Blue and White party in this third national election for Israel in the space of a year. Israelis frustrated with the political deadlock. They turned out to vote with a 71% vote to turn out the highest number since 1999. But does this, in fact, provide a path forward for a ruling coalition to be formed? Let's put that question to our Mike Wagenheim. Mike.
Not yet is the answer to that question. Benjamin Netanyahu in a celebratory mood, but still has a whole lot of work to be done because at least according to the exit polls, and they're only exit polls, we've got to keep reminding you, he doesn't have that magical 61 yet, 61 members of Knesset to form a majority government. So according to the exit polls, he still has to pick off a couple of defectors. People are making a whole lot right now of Benny Gantz and his loss tonight, and it is in some ways a loss. Let's take a look at the most updated numbers. These are actual hard numbers. Almost 5% of the vote has been counted thus far across the country. The Likud party out in front, 32.5% of the vote. Benny Gantz's Blue and White faction, a little over 24%. We're not sure where these votes have been counted from in terms of what parts of the country, whether they're Blue and White strongholds, whether the Likud strongholds or elsewhere. So the numbers could be skewed, but these are hard numbers that have come in so far from the Central Elections Committee. But let's take a look at the exit polls, which is the bulk of the statistics that we have to go on so far. Looking right now, Likud had 32 seats after the September election. The average that they have with the three exit polls right now is about 36, 37. Blue and White, meanwhile, had 33 seats after the last election. The average that they have with the exit polls after this one is 33 seats. So they didn't lose any seats. Likud gained a lot. The question is, where did Likud pick those seats off from? There are only 120 seats to go around. Well, it looks like they picked one or two away from Yamina, the party to their right, a hardline religious coalition of three different parties. It looks like they picked off one or two from Yisrael Beitenu, now enemy number one for Benjamin Netanyahu. His now rival, Avigdor Lieberman, his former protege, looks to have lost a seat or two since the last election. Also have to take a look at the left-wing parties. The left-wing parties, the Jewish left-wing parties in Israel, ran on two separate tickets in the September election and got 11 seats total. This time they ran together. They only got 7 seats, according to the exit polls. Some of them were lost to the Joint Arab List. Others appear, shockingly, to have gone to the right-wing bloc.
All right, Mike, thanks so much, Mike Wagenheim. We will, of course, continue to check in with you. But let's now go live to our studios in Tel Aviv. And Eli Hochenberg is standing by there. Eli, you were at the Likud headquarters. Certainly a celebratory mood over there. We heard Prime Minister Netanyahu addressing his base, thanking them profusely for their support. What was the main message that Prime Minister Netanyahu was giving the people of Israel tonight?
Right, so Benjamin Netanyahu definitely did not give up the opportunity to have a victorious speech. Michelle, as you said, thanking his supporters and dubbing it his greatest victory yet, even though, as our Mike Wagenheim just illustrated, there's a huge difference in the Israeli political game between 59 to 60 seats. But the main goal in Netanyahu's speech tonight, Michelle, was to make a mark on the post-election consciousness, to continue to rule the discourse, to dictate the tone, to make sure that he's the one to have the leverage on whatever will happen from this point onwards, vowing, of course, to make all efforts to form this so-called nationalist government that will consist of right-wing parties. But as it appears, it will not be enough. What is the most important element in Netanyahu's speech is to, again, make an impact on the overall Israeli consciousness, on his political partners or opposition, to make sure they all know that he's the one holding all the cards.
You know, Eli, when we heard Benny Gantz address the Blue and White headquarters, he made sure to remind everyone that Prime Minister Netanyahu is still facing a trial on 3 charges of bribery and corruption, but that didn't seem to deter his voters. Why is that?
And not just now, Michelle, but 3 consecutive times. We need to bear in mind that ahead of the April 2019 elections, it feels like ancient history, but it was not so long ago. The potential game changer was the announcement of the Attorney General, again, back then ahead of the April elections, that he intends to indict Prime Minister Netanyahu. Ever since, of course, we're already talking about a starting date to the trial, March 17, but it did not deter Netanyahu's supporters nor right-wing voters as a whole. And the thing about the Blue and White Party, and I'm sure you will elaborate on that further later on in the show, is that we need to remember that this political hybrid was created and with one main goal, to topple Benjamin Netanyahu. They had 3 shots. We're talking about 3 different parties, some of them political newbies, most notably, of course, Benny Gantz. They've made a quite impressive way together, but with a third failure of offering an alternative to the Netanyahu rule. One main question remains: how long will they be able to stick together? We know that there are many, many differences between the leadership of the party and the members of the party. Only in the last couple of hours, we have heard so many different, somewhat opposing statements on behalf of different members of the Blue and White Party. So the fate of the Blue and White Party is very much up in the air at this point in time as well. And be sure, Michelle, that Netanyahu and his Likud party will try to capitalize on that, perhaps find some potential defectors from the Blue and White party, or at least some elements within this political hybrid. So a lot more to look forward to in this respect as well.
That does seem to be the strategy that Netanyahu may go for if the results do in fact mirror the exit poll results, and as you say, to try and pick off some members of the Blue and White Party. Eli, thank you so much. Eli Hochenberg live for us in our Tel Aviv studios. Let's bring back Thane Rosenbaum, distinguished professor at Torah University, and Eric Mendel, director of the Middle East Political Information Network. All right, Thane, as we heard Eli make the point, could this be the unraveling of the Blue and White Party?
I think so. I think we have to think about how ineffectual Gantz was. He never caught fire. And he admittedly said, I'm not an orator.
But can we really say he was ineffectual? This is a new party that came out of nowhere and still positioned itself as the second biggest party on the Israeli political stage.
But remember, this isn't the United States, although frankly the United States has changed too, right? Donald Trump had entered in without ever having elected office. This is not totally uncommon for someone who had served in the military. I mean, most of Israel's prime ministers, many of them had been former generals. So there was some hope that this fresh face with this impeccable, distinguished military career. Remember, Netanyahu always saw himself as Mr. Security. I'm the prime minister for security. So the Blue and White Party is represented by a former IDF chief of staff. But he wasn't effective. This is now the 3rd election. And on the other hand, I would say, and he was facing a prime minister that had looming corruption charges. So he had some advantages. On the other hand, Netanyahu had President Trump and all the gifts that happened there, and had a booming economy and a strong case for being a steward of their national security. So, look, it's in some ways not a victory for either of them because they just couldn't punch each other out. But this is the best that Netanyahu has shown thus far, and it gets him as close as possible to 61. He might even get to 61 when the votes are ultimately counted, and I think that's where the enthusiasm is, that he clearly has peeled away votes. The one question I have, Mike raised it as well, is where did all those real votes go? Because remember, we have an increase in the number of voters. So there's an increase in the number of voters, and there was an attempt by the prime minister to peel away votes from other right-wing parties. Right. I wonder whether Netanyahu, in the end, won't actually get more seats in order to reflect both the surge in voting as well as the loss of seats to some of his right-wing coalition members.
And again, we do want to stress that these are just the exit poll results. We're still awaiting the official results. Only about 5% of them have been counted so far. But we do know, though, that there has been a tremendous turnout for the Joint Arab List. They've gained seats. We'll continue our election coverage right after the break. Keep it here.
Strictly Security, your weekly look into security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. Our team brings the latest on the major international conflicts, analysis of the major security issues right here in the Middle East and around the globe. Join us for a close look at innovative military technology and get up to speed with what's happening in cyberspace. Saturdays, only on i24 News.
Let's now check out what is on the cutting edge.
They bring the data, we bring the analytics and the technology.
There are techniques today which can actually take cells and print them to make an organ.
The internet turned the brick and mortar business on top of its head.
On Stateside, it's not just about delivering the news. It's about giving meaning to the news and doing so with clarity.
These families waiting to get into the country, how long will they be in detention?
What happens around the rest of the world can have a huge impact on the United States. And what happens in the United States can have a huge impact on the rest of the world. That's Stateside.
Welcome back to i24's special coverage of the Israeli elections 2020. I'm Michelle McQuarrie in New York. Let's go now to Tel Aviv, where Owen Altman is standing by. Owen, the results that we're getting do seem to indicate that the Likud party, Prime Minister Netanyahu's party, has gained a couple of seats at the expense of perhaps the Blue and White party. But what we're also seeing is that the Joint Arab List, according to the exit polls, has made a significant gain by at least 2 seats in this election. Now, Benny Gantz hasn't quite taken a definitive position on where he stands with regards to the Joint Arab List. Is there any scenario where you see a coalition being formed in that direction?
Michelle, it's a great question. You know, interviewers time and time again over the last few weeks were trying to pin down Benny Gantz on exactly this question, twisting his arm in order to get a definitive commitment. It was awfully hard to do. When he was pinned down, Gantz did more or less rule it out, but it took so long for him to get there that you wonder if he was trying to leave some kind of wiggle room. Look, Michelle, there are so many obstacles towards getting there. Let's start with a few. First of all, Avigdor Lieberman, who has absolutely ruled out any kind of cooperation with the Joint Arab List, and he has a long history of hostility toward many of their politicians. He told one of their leaders in a television studio that he looks forward to an exchange of populations so that he's no longer part of the state of Israel. So that's the starting point for Avigdor Lieberman and the Joint Arab List. Not much of a starting point to form any kind of political partnership. That's number one. Number two, within Benny Gantz's own coalition, within his own Blue and White party, there are a few members of parliament who themselves are not sure that they would be willing to raise their hands in the Israeli parliament to support a government that they knew would rely on support from the Joint Arab List. So Gantz would have to get past that obstacle as well. And third, if the talks were to progress and then fall apart, then Gantz might have another obstacle in a potential fourth election. Again, he's after those voters on Israel's soft right, and those voters are against a government that involves the Joint List in any form, in any way, even from the outside, and Gantz would risk losing them. All of that said, 2 things. Number one, Gantz, like any politician, wants to become prime minister, and if this is one way for him to try to get there, he might be inclined to try to take it. And number two, Michelle, very, very importantly, you know, in our i24 News Israel Hayom poll over the last few weeks, a number of times we asked Israeli voters, how do you feel about this idea of a minority government with the Joint Arab List supporting from the outside? Tell you something, among Blue and White voters, at least one of those weeks, 19% were against it, but 59% supported it. Michelle, it may well be that Gantz's own constituents, his own voters, are strongly in favor of that kind of government. So at least among his own voters, he might not pay an electoral price for it.
That is an interesting development there, Owen. Look, Owen, what we're hearing is that the potential strategy for Netanyahu may be to pick off members from the Blue and White Party. But we got a similar message from Benny Gantz earlier in the day, where he was saying when this corruption trial for Benjamin Netanyahu starts to take into effect, that they may in fact have defectors from the Likud party over to Blue and White. How likely is that?
Listen, Michelle, it almost happened about a year ago. Don't forget that Avi Gabay and Tal Russo of the Labor Party almost came over to the right-wing side, and that would have prevented, of course, the second and third elections, but of course at the cost of fracturing the Labor Party, and some would say having those two breaking their promises to their voters. They ultimately decided not to do it, and the rest, as they say, is history. Look, on the one hand, each of these sides is likely to be very close to the magic number of 61, so it wouldn't take too many to get there. Unlike, for example, the situation after September's election, when the right wing had 55 members of parliament. That means they needed to get 6 more, and that's a pretty big haul. Michelle, I will say this. There are a lot of legal complications and constitutional complications here in Israel for someone to defect sides. They lose the potential to run in the next election with an existing political party, and they cannot be appointed as a minister or a deputy minister in most cases. And that means that the natural carrots that Benjamin Netanyahu or Benny Gantz could offer to potential defectors aren't really there, and that they would be taking a risk, potentially, particularly if there is a potential fourth election looming very, very soon, that they might have to face voters very soon and have very limited options on how to run. Now, there are some, for various reasons, who might have an easier time of doing this because of the way they're positioned in terms of their factions. But again, this is something that's going to be closely watched. There's obviously been a lot of speculation over the last few hours, particularly that members of parliament from Blue and White could defect to the right-wing bloc. I asked a member of parliament, Asaf Zamir, about that earlier tonight, here in Israel at the Blue and White event. He seemed confident that that wouldn't happen. We should say it hasn't happened up until now, but the past doesn't necessarily prove the future. And you better believe that both of these sides, as we see the results coming in tonight and depending on how exactly they shake out, will be looking for exactly those few defectors to put them over the top.
All right, Owen, thank you so much for that update. Owen Altman live for us in Tel Aviv. Let's bring back our panel, Thane Rosenbaum and Eric Mandel, and also joining us again from Tel Aviv is Martin Himmel. Eric, want to focus on the national unity government, because that was a dream. The previous elections, there was hope that there would be a center-right coalition government that would ostensibly nullify the pressure of the religious parties, and we'd have a secular governing party, because Blue and White and the Likud are very similar in terms of the big security policies. Is that idea dead in the water now?
Well, Blue and White made very clear that they were not going to do it with a prime minister who is under indictment. From an American point of view, looking over there, I would prefer to see a unity government, because what I look at from here, what Congress looks at from here, what Jewish Americans look at from here, is a country that's under stress. A narrow right-wing government is a divisive government for the Israeli people, and that hurts U.S.-Israel relations when there's division, because American Jewry and pro-Israel people will be polarized by it, similar to our politics over here. And also with this upcoming indictment that's going on, the stress on the Israeli people is going to be tremendous. And as we've discussed before, having unelected judges deciding if Bibi is able to get to 61, to say that, no, the people shouldn't have their voice. This is really echoes what went on in this country when Donald Trump, I'm not trying to compare them exactly, but basically people were trying to get him out before he even took office. So I'm worried about the country and what this means on a more macro level, and I don't think any of these changes are necessarily good. The other thing is here is that we talk about how this is going to play out. April 2019, they had 60 seats. They were not able to get anybody to switch over. So a fourth election, I hate to say, is really still possible, but there is definitely, Bibi has gotten a momentum.
Martin Himmel in Tel Aviv, do you get the sense that campaign promises will be broken in order to prevent a fourth election?
Well, I think there's several scenarios. Everybody says that Lieberman will not go with Netanyahu under no circumstance. That's not etched in stone. They might come up with something. If Lieberman feels that it's going to a fourth election, I don't think he'll tolerate that. They might come up with some modus vivendi where he will go over to the Likud. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that Lieberman says he'll never go with the Arabs, but if Gantz gets the Arab parties to support him from afar, meaning at arm's length, not actually come into the coalition, maybe Lieberman will look the other way and he'll go with Gantz for a while for a chance to press his party's position of separating church and state, of enacting laws that make Israel more secular. So something like that might shift. I think both Gantz, Lieberman, and Netanyahu definitely do not want a fourth election. Whoever precipitates a fourth election may be seriously punished by the Israeli voter.
Right. Thane, one of the issues that Lieberman had, of course, was with the religious parties avoiding military conscription. They don't have to serve in the army, unlike other Israelis. Another issue that Lieberman had, of course, was with the Gaza security situation. He felt that there wasn't decisive enough action done and that there was a cycle of violence being repeated over and over again. If we do have this right-wing coalition, and let's say you do have some defectors from blue and white, are any of those issues going to be addressed?
Well, one would hope. First of all, Lieberman may have lost seats here. So remember, it was after the first election that he became a kingmaker. We use those words about him. So now it appears that he might have, based on the exit poll, lost some seats. So he has much less leverage, and he has much more incentive to come over with Netanyahu. But remember, Netanyahu is not soft on terrorism, right? So to get him to be more aggressive, I mean, look, Lieberman may want to just scorch the earth in Gaza, right? The politically impossible, unpalatable decision. But it's not as if we don't have a prime minister that is unsympathetic to protecting Israelis from Gaza. The question of the religious parties, Michelle, that's a bigger question, much tougher. Why? The loyalty that they have shown Netanyahu is extraordinary. In fact, the question you asked earlier to Owen, yes, it's unlikely that he'll lose any of the coalition because, remember, even within Likud, in the primaries, he crushed Gideon Sa'ar. He proved that among the right wing, and certainly Likud, they love me. That does not exist on the left wing. They're completely in shambles. But the right wing is very much united. So the problem is, would in order to bring Israel Beitenu over, in order to lure them over, could he possibly betray the ultra-Orthodox religious parties on matters of serving in the IDF, matters of religion, on matters of state and society and culture? I doubt it. I think he's going to have to be loyal to them.
All right, let's see how that shakes out. Thane, thank you so much. Thane Rosenbaum, Eric Mandel, and Martin Himmel. Now, of course, as we've been updating you on the Israeli election situation, we also want to keep you updated on other stories making headlines around the world. Let's go down to Derek Dennis in our newsroom tonight with the latest.
Yeah, Michelle, we'll get to the numbers in just a moment. But first, the U.S. government has issued its strongest travel warning yet, advising Americans travel to two regions in northern Italy that have been hard hit by the coronavirus. Globally, there are more than 88,000 confirmed cases and more than 3,000 deaths. In the U.S., there have been 6 deaths in Washington state, and researchers say the virus may have been circulating there in the Pacific Northwest for weeks undetected. Meantime, across the country, there are 100 confirmed cases of the coronavirus, including the first case in New York, a 39-year-old woman who recently returned from Iran and has tested positive. Stocks, well, they rebounded today on Wall Street, regaining some of the ground lost last week and the worst sell-off since the financial crisis of 2008. Investors optimistic that central banks will take action to shield the global economy from the effects of the coronavirus. Here are the numbers. Take a look. The Dow rebounding with gains of more than 1,200 points or 5.09%, its biggest point gain ever. The Nasdaq jumping to nearly 4.5%, and the S&P 500 up 4.6%. In the race for 20 2020, the Democratic field is consolidating with two candidates dropping out and throwing their support behind Joe Biden. And this is breaking news. Amy Klobuchar expected to join former Vice President Joe Biden at a rally in Dallas tonight, along with Pete Buttigieg, who ended his run for the White House yesterday and has already endorsed Biden tonight. Both Buttigieg and Klobuchar will stand with Biden this hour at that Texas rally, putting up a united front of moderates in the campaign. And their location is notable. Texas is one of the 14 states where voters are heading to the polls tomorrow on Super Tuesday. It has the second largest number of delegates at stake behind California. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg says he's still in the race and spoke highly of both Klobuchar and Buttigieg tonight. James Lipton, we should tell you, the creator and host of Inside the Actors Studio, has died at the age of 93. The titan of the film and entertainment industry was at his home in Manhattan when he passed away. His wife said he had been suffering from bladder cancer. Lipton's show, one of cable's longest running. Those are the headlines from I-24 News. I'm Derek Dennis. Our coverage continues next.
Politics, economics, business, and technology. Get the real news and the real insight about what's happening around the world. Michelle McCory breaks down the top stories of the day from the Middle East to the U.S. Weeknights beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern. News 24 is a Spanish-language weekly news magazine on I-24 News, presented by respected journalists Carlos Gurovich and Damian Pachter, bringing you news and analysis of the most important issues of the Middle East and Israel, with the added perspective of the impact on the Spanish-speaking world. News 24, only on I-24 News.
We're on the inside of political and religious passions in Jerusalem, breaking down the financial trends shaping the global economy, giving you key context, not just headlines, with the stories from Israel that touch the U.S. and those across the region with impact far beyond its borders. Catch the rundown where the Middle East meets the world.
An emergency. People are already suffering and dying from the consequences of the climate and environmental emergency. But it will get worse. And still, this emergency is being completely ignored by the politicians, the media, and those in power. Well, I will not stand aside and watch. I will not be silent while the world is on fire. Will you?
Welcome back to I-24's special coverage of Israeli elections 2020. I'm Michelle McCory in New York, and it's about 5.5 hours since Israelis went to the polls, the third national election in the space of a year. High voter turnout, about 71% of Israelis came out to vote, very eager to end the political deadlock that has beset the country. Let's see if this time around, if third time is indeed a charm for Prime Minister Netanyahu. The exit polls do seem to indicate that he does have a lead over Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party. Let's get a more thorough and detailed breakdown with our Mike Wagenheim. Mike.
He's got a lead in the exit polls, big celebration, confetti, balloons, singing and dancing. He's not there yet. Let's take a look at those three exit polls from the major television stations in Israel. Again, these are exit polls, not necessarily reflective of the hard count. These are simply surveys. Channel 11 showing Likud with a 59-54 advantage over Blue and White. The supposed kingmaker, really spoiler, Yisrael Beitenu party with 7. So nobody there at the magical 61 mark to form a majority government. Channel 12, meanwhile, showing Likud ahead, 59-54, same exact count. Channel 13 puts Likud at 59 again. Blue and White a little bit heavier at 55. You got to get to 61 members of parliament to form a majority government. According to these exit polls, Likud is not there yet. And if they only have 59 in the actual voting, they're going to have to pull a couple of defectors away from the other bloc. Let's take a look at the hard numbers. These are actual votes counted to this very moment. About 6.5% of the vote across the country has been counted, though we don't know exactly what districts these votes have been counted in. Likud ahead of Blue and White, 32% to 24%. Joint Arab List, the surprise of the night so far, a little bit over 10%. But again, a long, long ways to go in the counting. You have to keep in mind, it's not just as simple as, okay, Netanyahu doesn't get to 61. Gantz can't get there. We go to a fourth election. There are implications, Michelle, for having an impermanent temporary government carry on for this long. Remember, the government folded last January. You've got to pass a budget. Other things have to happen. The Haredi parties, the ultra-Orthodox parties, who have long been partners of Benjamin Netanyahu, their money is about to run out because there's no budget in place right now. They're relying on money for their constituencies, relying on money for yeshivas, their seminaries. These are core issues for them. If they continue down this road with a fourth election, that money runs dry. Their constituents will be up in arms. It's issues like this that have to be taken into account when you're talking about negotiations and when you're talking about if Netanyahu can't get to 61, could the unthinkable happen? And maybe these parties go over to Benny Gantz's side. Yes, it's a stretch, but certainly when you're talking about that money running dry, which is really, for the most part, the only reason that these Haredi parties remain with Netanyahu, it's not ideological. They're not hardcore Zionists. They don't share security, or they don't care if embassies are moving to Jerusalem. They know that the money will keep coming to them from Netanyahu. They give votes in return. It's worked out well for both sides. That money runs dry, they could very well head to the other side where they can get a better deal. These implications are coming of having a temporary government for this long, and this is one example.
All right, Mike, we'll check in with you a little bit later, Mike Wagenheim. Let's now go to Tel Aviv, where Eli Hochenberg is standing by. Eli, we've heard Mike run through the exit poll scenarios. When are we going to get the real official results? What's the timeline for that?
Well, it will take about 2 more days to get the final results, but a clear indication can be expected as early as tomorrow. But I would like to touch on one of the points our Mike Wagenheim just discussed, the division into 2 clear-cut blocks. We keep on talking about the central left-wing bloc led by Benny Gantz and the Blue and White Party, and the right-wing bloc led by Benjamin Netanyahu. But if we are indeed heading to yet another political deadlock, we need to start getting used to the fact that blocs are not necessarily as such. And perhaps the best example are indeed the 2 ultra-Orthodox parties traditionally throughout Israeli history never aligned with either side of the political divide. Their agenda has nothing to do with right or left, but during the Netanyahu years, they have, of course, kept very loyal to the right wing, or more accurately, very loyal to Benjamin Netanyahu. And same goes to the other side of the political map, most notably, of course, the Blue and White Party, consisting of 3 different parties, united only ahead of the April 2019 elections, and the divisions there, the opinions there, are very much conflicting. Only in the past couple of hours, ever since those exit polls came out, we've heard so many conflicting statements on behalf of different members of the Blue and White Party that, again, join forces with one clear goal: to offer an alternative to the Netanyahu rule, to topple the Netanyahu rule, and for 3 times in a row, they failed to do so. So their fate is very much up in the air as well. As for Netanyahu, he hoped for a landslide victory. That appeared to be the case at the earlier stage of the evening, but there's a huge difference between 59 and 60 seats. But Netanyahu did not miss the opportunity to have a victorious speech. He dubbed the victory tonight as the biggest he had yet. And the main idea here, Michelle, is to try and set the tone for what will happen next, to have an impact, as said earlier in the broadcast, on the consciousness of Israelis, on the consciousness of his political partners and rivals, and from this point onwards, to be perceived as the biggest winner of the night, and not as someone who might have won and might have not.
And Ellie, help our viewers understand what, in fact, could happen next with that March 17th trial for bribery and corruption looming over Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Right, indeed. So that was that's the date that has been set to the beginning of the trial. If Netanyahu will climb up in the polls and reach in some way this golden number of 61 seats, his lawyers might potentially ask for a delay in this respect, but that does not appear to be the case. But we need to understand that the trial is a long, long process. What will happen on March 17 is essentially a readout. The judges will read out the indictments. Then Netanyahu and the other suspects will have to enter their plea, and then we're entering a very long, bureaucratic, and to be honest, quite boring phase of back and forth between the different legal teams. So the juicy part, if you will, of the multiple witnesses that will come to testify, and Netanyahu himself, of course, through his legal team, giving his own take on what exactly unfolded in those 3 different corruption cases. It's long, long months away from us, and we still have lots of twists and turns expected on the political level that, as we understand, are profoundly intertwined with the legal aspect of Netanyahu's challenges at this point in time.
A long and winding road ahead indeed, Ellie. Ellie, one of the things that Prime Minister Netanyahu was promising his voters was that he was going to take advantage of the Trump administration's Israeli-Palestinian plan, and that he would extend Israeli sovereignty to certain areas of the West Bank. How much of an impact do you think the Trump peace plan played in, how big of an impact do you think it had in these elections?
Well, Netanyahu definitely hoped, without any doubt, that his diplomatic achievements will have a great impact on the political status. He had this remarkable week of going from Washington, the great unveiling of the Trump peace plan, to Moscow to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin, and to bring back home Naameh Issaschar, this Israeli youngster that was imprisoned in Moscow. Was a big deal here in Israel. A few days later, heading to another visit to Africa, announcing the pending rapprochement with Sudan. So he really hoped that the diplomacy of his rule will have a direct impact on politics. We haven't really seen that in a clear manner. Perhaps more importantly was the mishandling on the opposition side. The fact that the Blue and White Party failed to capitalize on Netanyahu's failures in this respect. The fact that he promised immediate sovereignty over territories in the West Bank that did not materialize. So perhaps the fact that they failed to capitalize on that was greater than his failures in this respect to an extent.
All right, Ellie, thank you so much. Ellie Hochenberg live for us in Tel Aviv. Keep it right here on I-24 as we bring you the latest from Israel's 3rd national elections. That's coming up.
the Middle East. I-24 News is a witness. Our journalists live and breathe there every day. Get all the latest global news from our studios in Tel Aviv, New York, Washington, and Paris. Anytime, anywhere. Download the I-24 News app, available on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple, and Google stores. I-24 News, see beyond.
Welcome back to I-24 special coverage of the Israeli elections. I'm Michelle McCory in New York. I do just want to get you updated on the latest official results, with about 6.6% of the votes counted. 32% of those votes going towards Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party, 23.9% going towards the Blue and White party led by Benny Gantz, and the Joint Arab List coming in with 10.4% of the vote. Again, these are just about 6.6% of the actual votes counted, so still a very long way away from the official results. But these do seem to mirror the trend that we've been seeing in the exit polls, which do seem to indicate a gain for Prime Minister's Netanyahu's Likud party, and Blue and White still coming in second with a difference of about 3 to 4 seats. Let's go now to Owen Alterman, who's joining us in Tel Aviv. Owen, what we are seeing in these election results is this continuing trend of the demise of the Labour Party. Amir Peretz, leader of the Labour Gesher Meretz party, coming in with about 6 votes, 6 Knesset seats, according to the exit polls. What do you make of this demise of what was once the ruling majority party of the Israeli political landscape?
Michelle, it's absolutely remarkable. And you're right. The Labour Party is the party that built the state of Israel. It ruled this country in almost every way for the first 29 years of its existence, until the pivotal 1977 election that first brought the Likud to power. And now Labour, in a coalition with 3 other parties, only gets, according to exit polls, about 6 or 7 seats in the Israeli parliament. A real day of reckoning, or I should say another real day of reckoning for the Labour Party. There are already lots of calls in Israeli media and in the Israeli political class for Amir Peretz, the head of the Labour Party, to step aside after having failed in 2 straight elections to really help the party grow. But you know, Michelle, these problems are so much deeper. And I think to really untangle the full problems of the Labour Party and the full story of its demise, it's going to take a good doctorate to be written to really fully understand it. But look, the Israeli left simply needs to find new constituencies. It needs to find some way to expand its base. It's interesting in this election, a lot of speculation that some of that growth in the Joint Arab List that we talked about a few moments ago was due to Jews from the Meretz party deciding to move leftward and vote for the Joint Arab List, dissuaded by the merger between Meretz and the Labour Party. These parties are going to have to find a new constituency. One possibility for them, Michelle, could be if the Blue and White Party, over the medium term, doesn't have staying power as a movement, as this unwieldy coalition of 3 different parties, maybe at that point, at least as a tactical victory, the Labor Party and Meretz and whatever constellation they are could pick off some voters from them. But again, beyond the votes that the left, as a left-wing party gets, of course, there's the question of how to grow the center-left. Because, Michelle, especially if you put to the side the votes for the Joint Arab List and the seats that it will win after what looks like an impressive performance in this election to the side, the center-left bloc is simply much smaller than the right-wing religious bloc, and demographics continue to favor the right-wing religious bloc because of the growth in the ultra-Orthodox population here in Israel. So in short, a lot of obstacles ahead for the Israeli left. Another real day of reckoning after these elections.
You know, Owen, these elections happened under the cloud of the coronavirus outbreak. Certainly that's been dominating headlines around the globe for the last couple of days. Help us understand the impact that the coronavirus outbreak had on voting today.
You know, another great question, Michelle, the Irish held elections about a month ago, but I think Israel is just about the first major democracy to hold national elections in what is well and truly the coronavirus era. And, the Israeli Health Ministry has been especially harsh in terms of the policies it's taken in the wake of the coronavirus episode, to the extent that we have more than 5,600 Israelis, who are asked to stay home and be quarantined for 14 days, either because they came back from an affected area, most notably Italy. So if you went on vacation to Italy and you had no idea coronavirus was going to strike, and you just happened to be there while it did, well, guess what? You came home, you have to spend 14 days at home, can't leave your house. And then there are other Israelis who potentially were exposed to coronavirus here. And as you mentioned, about 14 to 16 polling places set up here in Israel specifically for them. They went to those polling places to vote, and they had somebody from the Israeli version of the Red Cross, the Magen David Adom, in there in a suit, looking like an astronaut, welcoming them to vote. They went, and the election committee was across a plastic partition. We saw, by the way, a lot of them come out and vote, to the extent that the Central Election Commission extended the voting hours of those polling places and opened 2 new ones. But listen, it doesn't seem to have affected turnout. Turnout was even higher in these elections than it was in the previous 2 elections. But this may be, Michelle, a precedent that other countries will want to copy if, unfortunately, this outbreak continues to spread and becomes a true pandemic, as to how to manage this, and on the one hand, balance public safety and public health concerns, and on the other hand, let people be able to go out and vote. And of course, in this case, we're talking about 5,600 healthy people. There's no sign in almost all of these cases that any of these people actually have coronavirus. And yet, of course, they still have the right to exercise their democratic right and come out and vote.
Owen, thank you so much for that update. Owen Altman, live for us in our Tel Aviv studios. Let's bring back my panel, Mika Helpin and Jonathan Tobin. Jonathan, we touched on the issue of the Arab vote, keeping in mind the Arab population makes up about 25% of Israel. The Arabs do have the exact same voting rights as Israelis. That's a point that's sometimes lost when the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is discussed, that the fact that you do have Arab Israeli citizens that do participate in government, that are members of Knesset. And here we saw that they seem to have gained more seats than in previous elections. What is the consequence of that?
Well, I think it's important to understand this because, in essence, the Arab parties are becoming the true opposition to the government of Israel, led by Benjamin Netanyahu. Because as much as we've been focusing certainly in the United States about Bernie Sanders, his attacks on AIPAC, his criticisms of Israel and its government and Netanyahu, between Netanyahu and Gantz, the 2 main contenders in this election, there wasn't really any difference on issues, right, on the struggle with the Palestinians. Gantz skedaddled to Washington to Me Too the Trump plan. In part, that's why he wasn't able to get any traction, because he doesn't present an alternative. The Arab parties do, and certainly for some Jewish leftists, that was sort of attractive. Yet, in the end, this really marks how, not merely the collapse of the Labor Party, the collapse of the traditional Jewish left. It really shows how there is really a consensus in Israel on major issues. The disagreement is about who should be prime minister, right, not the borders of Israel or how the conflict with the Palestinians should be administered.
Mika, was this essentially yet another referendum on Netanyahu, with the blue and white's main message being anyone but Bibi?
Yes, it was not just the referendum. What it really did is and we're skewing the numbers here, and it's a mistake mathematically, because we're putting numbers up like 59 to 54. The numbers aren't anywhere close to that, because you have to remove the 14 or 15 joint Arab list numbers. You can't put them in. So really...
You mean when we talk about the left bloc?
Versus the right, exactly. You can't do that, because what it does is it creates a system where it looks as if it's parallel. There's no parallel at all. There's nowhere close to it. In other words, the left is shrinking smaller and smaller and smaller, and the right is growing, but not because in proportion of the religious parties. The religious numbers are the same. It's that people have moved from the left to the center right. That's where the real numbers are. And that's where Netanyahu's real base is. And it's family members of people who are living in settlements and in the areas of the West Bank. Not just the numbers there, because those numbers are relatively small. It's people who support that idea, which is very, very important to recognize. So the numbers aren't anywhere close to that. They're not, obviously, the number between the Likud party and Blue-White party is close. But I'm talking about the larger electorate I'm talking about. And that's something that's really important to recognize. The rise of the Arab Party and their unity is actually one of the greatest political moves that's happened in Israel itself. Over the last 3 elections, they have been together. They were never together, but now they are, which is a very, very interesting idea.
And, Martin, one of the points that Prime Minister Netanyahu was making in the September election was pointing out that a faction of the Joint Arab List is actually against Israel's right to exist. And that he was using as ammunition against Benny Gantz, saying that if he does, in fact, form some kind of coalition with the Joint Arab List, he's in fact forming a coalition with certain aspects of that party that deny Israel's right to exist. So when you've got a 25% population now coming in with, let's say, 14, 15 Knesset seats, what does that mean for Israel's political future going forward?
Well, regardless what they might believe or not, they are a political power, and they have been legally elected to the Knesset, so that makes them a power. And I think that Benny Gantz is going to be facing a very serious choice. If he does reach 61 or 62 total with those Arab parties, he's got 2 choices. He can just hand over the keys to power to Netanyahu and let him govern, or he has to reach some sort of understanding of those Arab parties in order to stop Netanyahu and to create a coalition himself. That's not going to be an easy choice, but Israeli leaders have made major unthinkable choices before. After all, Ariel Sharon made a unilateral withdrawal from Gaza and was branded a traitor for it. Prime Minister Menachem Begin left Sinai and was branded a traitor for it. Maybe Benny Gantz will make a deal with the devil, quote unquote, with the Arab parties, and he may be branded a traitor, but he may do it and actually set up a government. But it's too early to tell. We still have to wait for the numbers. But clearly, if the left plus the Arabs have more than 61, Gantz can either just hand the keys to Netanyahu, let him set up a government, or will have to make a deal with the Arab parties.
All right. Martin Himmel, thank you very much. Jonathan Tobin, 30 seconds, final thoughts.
I think every time we've had this, done this for the last 3 times, we've said, well, this is Netanyahu's final act. Well, I think we've learned not to say that. Netanyahu may go on a lot longer than any of us thought a year ago or several months ago.
The Teflon Prime Minister, Mika, nothing seems to stick to him in terms of anything negative. Give us your final thoughts, again, on what are the exit poll results, and we cannot stress this enough, still not the official results.
Well, firstly, it's a major victory for Israeli democracy. The fact that Israelis were excited about it was a day off. No school, no work. And people came out. Normally, they would go to the beach or go have a barbecue with the family. Instead, what they did is they came out and they actually voted. They took it seriously. They didn't take the first or second election as seriously. And that's a major success for Israeli democracy.
Yeah, they took it seriously because they want to prevent the political deadlock that we've seen as the result of the other elections.
They wanted someone who has experience.
All right, Mika, thank you so much. Mika Halpin, Jonathan Tobin. And again, before we go tonight, we just want to give you a quick recap. The exit polls do indicate that Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party holds about a 3 to 4 seat lead over Benny Gantz's Blue and White party. The exit polls also indicate that his bloc, or the right-wing parties, could have between 59 to 60 Knesset seats, still not enough to form a ruling coalition. Now, if he does find a way to do that, it would be a record 5th term in office for Netanyahu, breaking the political logjam that has paralyzed Israel for more than a year. But let's not forget, he still faces trial in 2 weeks on corruption charges March 17th. So any projected result will, of course, also be impacted by that. All right, keep it right here on I-24 News as we continue to bring you the latest from Israel's national elections 2020, the 23rd Knesset being elected.